What if pain wasn't just an inevitable setback, but the very foundation upon which life is built? It's unsettling to think about. But have you ever found yourself achieving something you deeply desired, only to realize that the excitement faded away too quickly? That long-awaited promotion, the new phone, or even a relationship that seemed to hold the key to happiness. And then, the emptiness returns, like a persistent shadow. Isn't it curious how we're always on the move, as if the next achievement will finally fill the void? Maybe it's the longing for something greater, or perhaps the discomfort of never feeling completely satisfied. After all, we live in a world that never lets us stop. There's always something to chase, something to want. But have we ever stopped to ask ourselves why? Is it truly happiness that drives us forward, or the attempt to escape an unnamed emptiness? Schopenhauer, one of the great thinkers of philosophy, believed that suffering isn't just a detail of existence, but its cornerstone. For him, we live in an endless cycle of desires that never cease, because as soon as we fulfill one, another takes its place. Life then becomes a constant alternation between wanting and frustration, never finding true peace. In this video, we're going to dive into this provocative and uncomfortable perspective, but one that brings profound lessons about how we approach our choices and our pursuit of happiness. We'll explore how desire drives us, how suffering shapes our existence, and what Schopenhauer's philosophy can teach us about it. And, ultimately, the big question: is it possible to escape this cycle? Imagine a glass with a small hole in the bottom. No matter how much you fill it, the water slowly leaks out, forcing you to refill it over and over again. That glass is like human desire. Schopenhauer, in his work, The World as Will and Representation, described desire as an eternal cycle. Satisfying it brings relief, but only temporarily, because soon another desire arises to fill the void left behind. The will, as he called it, is a blind force that drives us relentlessly. In our everyday lives, this is evident in the consumer culture that surrounds us. Think about how the anxiety of owning the latest smartphone consumes us. After weeks of waiting, we finally purchase the most advanced model, feeling a rush of satisfaction. Yet it doesn't take long for the charm to fade. What once seemed essential quickly loses its allure, and the search for something better begins again. Isn't it curious how we're always chasing the next big thing, without realizing we're trapped in this cycle? The paradox of desire lies in the fact that it both propels and imprisons us. Schopenhauer believed that this endless pursuit is inherent to the human condition. We desire because to live is to desire. However, satisfaction is never definitive, because the very nature of desire is to be insatiable. This explains why, even after achieving what we want, happiness is fleeting, and the emptiness soon returns. This cycle can be observed in every aspect of our lives. Think about relationships, for instance. The desire to be with someone can be so intense that, once realized, daily life often turns that passion into routine. The search for novelty or something more exciting reignites, as though there were no definitive endpoint, even in personal achievements, like advancing a career or reaching long-term goals. Satisfaction is quickly replaced by new ambitions. It seems we never truly arrive. Schopenhauer's insights might be unsettling, but they invite us to deeply reflect on our desires, our struggles, and the way we navigate life's persistent restlessness. So, what can we do about it? Is there a way to live beyond this endless loop of wanting and dissatisfaction? When we observe this, an inevitable question arises. If we know that satisfaction is fleeting, why do we keep chasing it as if it were eternal? Perhaps it's because, without desire, there would be no movement. Without movement, life would stagnate. In this way, desire becomes both a vital force and a source of frustration. But what if, instead of fighting it, we learn to live with its cyclical nature? Imagine a plant growing among stones. Its roots encounter obstacles with every inch they stretch. Yet it is precisely this resistance that makes them stronger. Without the hardness of the soil and the challenges of its environment, the plant would not have the strength to establish itself and bloom. For Schopenhauer, life follows the same logic. Suffering is not just an inevitable part of existence, but the very force that drives it forward. He argued that without pain, life would become an empty repetition. After all, it's dissatisfaction that drives us to seek, grow, and create. Think about moments when you felt the weight of failure or the frustration of loss, as difficult as they may have been. Wasn't it precisely this discomfort that pushed you to act, change, or reflect? Like the plant growing through the stones, suffering shapes us and gives form to our journey. This idea applies to our personal achievements and human relationships. Consider the effort required to build a successful career. Learning often comes from mistakes. Resilience emerges from overcoming failures and moments of pain. Frequently give meaning to victories. Similarly, in relationships, conflicts and challenges can strengthen bonds, while the absence of any friction might lead to stagnation or indifference. Schopenhauer went further. He believed that if all difficulties were removed, life would lose its purpose. In a world where everything was easy and free of challenges, how would we find meaning? It's an unsettling thought, but perhaps the absence of adversity would deprive us of one of the most fundamental forces driving our growth. Suffering, therefore, is not merely a consequence of life. It is its engine. It's like a headwind that challenges a bird's flight, but also keeps it airborne. Without it, there would be no movement. This perspective prompts an important reflection. If we work so hard to avoid pain, could it be that we are rejecting something essential to our very existence? Perhaps suffering is more than an adversity. Perhaps it is the soil in which our greatest achievements take root. Have you ever stopped to think about how two people can look at the same sky and see completely different things? One might see freedom, while the other sees loneliness. This happens because the world we perceive is not reality itself, but a construction created by our minds. Schopenhauer described this as, the world is representation. What we see is filtered by our senses, shaped by our experiences, and influenced by our desires. By understanding this, we can begin to see how our perceptions, and even our suffering, are part of a subjective reality shaped by who we are and how we engage with the world. This idea, deeply influenced by Kant, suggests that we never access the objective world directly. What we see, hear, and touch is always interpreted by our minds, as if through an invisible lens shaping every detail. In everyday life, this is evident in social media. Think of the filters that alter images to make them look more appealing. They create an idealized version of reality, but never show it as it truly is. Similarly, our perception is always mediated by our expectations and interpretations. Schopenhauer took this idea to an even deeper level. He argued that the reality we perceive is merely a construction of the mind, influenced by our own will, the desire that drives us. This means that even how we interpret the simplest experiences, like a conversation or a sunset, is inevitably tainted by what we seek or fear. This perspective leads us to an intriguing question. If everything we perceive is filtered through our subjective lens, can we ever truly know absolute truth? Or are we doomed to see only distorted fragments of reality, like a mirror that never reflects everything? Our minds provide only pieces, leaving much in shadow. Perhaps true wisdom lies in acknowledging these limitations and embracing the complexity of what we are able to perceive. Imagine a wheel spinning endlessly. Each rotation represents a cycle of desires, temporary satisfactions, and new cravings, repeating infinitely. This image, central to the Buddhist concept of samsara, resonates with Schopenhauer's philosophy, which was profoundly influenced by Eastern traditions such as Buddhism and the Upanishads. For him, life was a constant cycle of suffering, fueled by the relentless pursuit of satisfaction. Eastern philosophies offered Schopenhauer a unique perspective on this cycle. In Buddhism, for instance, desire is seen as the root of suffering, and overcoming this cycle is the path to enlightenment. Schopenhauer adapted this view into his philosophy, describing the will as the blind force that keeps us trapped in this perpetual motion. He found deep parallels between Eastern traditions and his own ideas about human nature. A Buddhist parable illustrates this connection well. A man seeking enlightenment decides to abandon all his desires. He realizes that everything he pursues binds him to suffering, like invisible chains. Only by letting go of attachment does he find true freedom. For Schopenhauer, this freedom corresponded to what he called the denial of the will, an effort to escape the enslavement of desire, and, with it, suffering. The texts of the Upanishads also had a profound impact on his philosophy. One of his favorite passages stated, "The mind is a universe." Schopenhauer interpreted this as a reminder that everything we experience is a creation of our minds, and that freeing ourselves from the tyranny of desire requires transforming our relationship with it. This encounter between East and West leaves us with an intriguing question. How far are we willing to let go of what binds us to seek something greater? And what can we learn from these philosophies about how to deal with suffering? Imagine the relief of listening to music that transports you to a moment of peace, or the tranquility of walking through a park while feeling the wind on your face. Schopenhauer believed that, although suffering is inevitable, there are ways to alleviate it. Among them, he highlighted asceticism and the appreciation of simple pleasures as means to escape, even if temporarily, the tyranny of desire. Asceticism, for him, was a radical way of breaking the cycle of desire. Inspired by Eastern philosophies, he saw this practice as a conscious effort to deny the impulses of the will. It is as if a person decides to step out of the wheel of samsara, refusing to be guided by what will never fully satisfy them. A contemporary example might be someone who chooses to live with less, renouncing the excess of material goods or the demands of modern society, to find a kind of inner freedom. On the other hand, Schopenhauer also recognized the power of small pleasures. He believed that moments of contemplation, such as admiring a work of art or getting lost in the beauty of a landscape, could disconnect us from the incessant pressure of the will. In these experiences, we are not seeking something. We are simply present. Think of how listening to touching music or watching the sunset can bring a peace that seems to go beyond time. There are also stories that illustrate this idea. A man, after years of pursuing wealth and status, decides to simplify his life. He trades the frenzy of the city for the quiet of the countryside, dedicating himself to tending a small garden. From this, he finds a serenity he had never felt before. For Schopenhauer, this attitude would be a way of living in harmony with reality, accepting suffering, but finding small refuges that temporarily relieve it. And what about us? Are we willing to change the way we deal with suffering? Schopenhauer prompts us to reflect on what truly brings peace amidst this constant agitation of the will. Perhaps the answer is not in eliminating suffering, but in transforming our relationship with it. Think, for instance, of the practice of contemplation, when we allow ourselves to observe nature without haste, listen to a melody without seeking distractions, or simply be present in a moment of the day. We create breaks in the incessant dynamics of desire. These moments of connection teach us that peace does not come from the absence of problems, but from an attitude of acceptance. As Schopenhauer said, it is in these moments that we can glimpse life without the interference of the will, experiencing something akin to what he called aesthetic elevation. Another way out proposed by the philosopher is detachment, not just material detachment, but emotional detachment. He suggests that by reducing our attachment to expectations, we can alleviate part of the pain that accompanies disappointments. It is like carrying a lighter backpack on a long walk. The steps are still challenging, but the weight does not prevent us from moving forward. Life stories also illustrate these ideas. Some people, after facing great adversity, choose to simplify their lives. They decide to live with less, focusing on experiences rather than possessions. Others dedicate themselves to practices like meditation, which doesn't eliminate challenges, but helps them face them with greater clarity. These choices, according to Schopenhauer, are ways to deny the will, and in doing so, ease suffering. The philosopher didn't believe suffering could ever be completely eliminated. However, he argued that understanding this cycle and seeking moments of pause can offer us a less turbulent existence. We may not be able to avoid life's difficulties, but we can choose how to respond to them, finding refuges that allow us to breathe amid the chaos. And you, what small choices have you made to deal with suffering? Perhaps it's time to reconsider how moments of simplicity and stillness might change your relationship with pain and desire. Reaching this point is no small feat. It means you're willing to confront questions we often avoid. It's not easy to think of desire as an endless cycle or suffering as something that defines our existence. But maybe you've felt, at some moment in your life, that these ideas resonate with something true. After all, Who hasn't felt lost after achieving something they deeply wanted? Who hasn't questioned whether the emptiness they feel can ever truly be filled? You've come this far because you're searching for something more, something beyond simple answers and empty promises. Maybe you want to better understand why happiness always seems so fleeting. Or maybe you're looking for a way to handle the weight of suffering that sometimes insists on showing up. And that, in itself, is already a huge step. Not everyone has the courage to face these questions head-on. So here's a question. What will you do with all of this? Is there something that can be transformed in the way you live with desire or confront pain? Schopenhauer might say the answer lies in accepting that life is, to a great extent, made up of these movements. But acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It means finding small gaps for serenity, like safe harbors amid the chaos. Simple moments, like a piece of music that moves you or a quiet moment alone, can be genuine reliefs in the storm. Life doesn't need to be perfect to have meaning. Maybe meaning is found in learning to dance with the highs and lows, in discovering beauty even in what feels broken. And that's what makes this journey so unique. No one can live it for you. But we don't have to face it alone either. Here, we create a space to reflect together, to share ideas that help us see the world and ourselves in a different light. So, if something here resonated with you, share it, write about it, comment, keep the conversation going. And if you enjoyed this video, there's much more waiting for you on the channel. We explore topics that provoke, inspire, and help us better understand who we are and the world around us. Check out the other videos, because this journey of self-discovery and reflection continues. We may not be able to escape suffering, but we can understand it. And maybe, in doing so, we'll find something that truly sustains us. A peace that doesn't depend on avoiding pain, but on learning how to live with it.